So let's talk a little bit about, since your topic is these 3 steps to immunity for narcissistic abuse. Could we go through those?
Yeah. So the very first step, which we kind of started talking about, is to identify the problem. So before you can change anything in your life, you have to be aware of what's wrong. So if you don't know that you're in an abusive relationship, then you're not going to be able to change anything. You're not going to be able to make any constructive decisions and actions. So first we need to recognize abuse, manipulation, recognize the patterns of behavior. And I recommend people focus more on those patterns of behavior than on the person itself, themselves. Are they a narcissist, or are they a psychopath, or are they a sociopath? And you can get really caught up in all of that. And that kind of doesn't matter as much. The point is, look at the behaviors, because it's always the same patterns of behavior. And then doing the research, right? That's when you dive in, you're educating yourself, you're watching videos, you're reading books, you're reading blogs, you're talking to people, you're getting a lot of information. It's also really important in this step to remember that that knowledge and that awareness is only potential power. So until we put that into responsible action, it's not real power yet. And it's also important in this stage of identifying the problem to recognize it in all areas of one's life, because chances are it's not just one relationship or one situation. It could be for some people, but typically they'll recognize it at work. Maybe they have a boss or coworkers like this, or they'll recognize it in a relationship. That's when they have to start examining all the areas of their life, their family, their other social context, to see where these patterns of behavior are showing up. So that's the important first step, is identifying the problem. We can't do anything until we know that. The second step is to get empowered through self-responsibility. So this is where you own 100% responsibility for your life. That's when everything starts to change. And we have to remember to hear that responsibility is not the same as blame and fault. Because a lot of times when we're in that victim stage, when we hear the word responsibility, we just feel ashamed. We feel blamed. Sometimes people misinterpret that as victim shaming, and it's not. It's victim empowerment. It's encouraging someone to change their life. That's very different than shaming someone for being a victim. That's empowering. And so remembering that shift from victim to survivor comes with that self-responsibility. And a slogan that I like to use is, self-responsibility is the new sexy, because I really want to promote this. I think this is something that's huge, missing in our society, is that piece of self-responsibility, not just around the narcissistic abuse, but in general. And so I even made a t-shirt out of this, because I really want people, I wear it around, I want people to think about this, to think about the responsibility that they have of their own life. And then the third step is strengthen through self-care. So the self-care piece is the main work of that survivor stage. So that's when we dive into the healing process. This is the longest process. It could take several years. If you were born in a family like this, if you were trained like this all your life, it's like essentially a lifetime work. Like, it gets better, right? As we do the work, things change a lot and they get a lot better. But I can also fully recognize, like, this is something I'm going to be working on my entire life, because those programs were so ingrained. And so as we work on that self-care, that's how we develop self-love. So if people are just starting this self-care piece, they're like, so where do I start? What's a good place to look? I recommend the 4 pillars of recovery. So that's self-worth, self-trust, self-esteem, and self-love. And it all really starts with self-worth. That's like the foundation of that. So when people, grow up in families like that, or spend a lot of time around these characters as an adult, what happens to your self-worth? It's crushed. And instead you have an enormous sense of shame. So how do you start to recover that? You have to first identify what your values are. You have to identify what matters to you, what's really important to you in your life. And that gives you something with which to create standards. Now you need to create new standards around those values, and then boundaries to protect all of that. So that's also something that we need to work on. The self-care piece is the boundaries. We come from these relationships or these families. Maybe we didn't have the right to say no. Maybe we're always sacrificing ourselves and putting someone else's needs or feelings or wants ahead of our own. These sorts of things, like the very basic boundary is no, is starting to say no to people when we know that that's not okay for us, or that's overextending the energy, the time, the resources that we have. And part of that too is what we call no contact, going no contact if possible with people like this, or the most minimum contact possible. For example, people who are raising children with someone like this, like by law, there has to be some contact for the sharing of the children, the meeting of their needs and expenses and all of that, but only having sort of a business relationship around the children, nothing personal. There's no personal relationship there. And so putting this boundary into place is one of the first boundaries that people start to work with once they realize how incredibly toxic having that person in their life is. And that's part of the responsibility piece, is taking responsibility for that and recognizing you can't change that person. Do you really want to keep waiting around, hoping that's going to happen, repeating the same situations? Or do you want to set that boundary so you stop exposing yourself to that abuse? Because then it's like you're on the gerbil wheel, right? So it's like you could be doing all this work on self-care and nothing is really changing because you keep getting set back by the contact with that person. So that's a huge important piece to starting the healing process, is going no contact with these people. Mm-hmm. And another part too is reprogramming all those people-pleasing behaviors. So we really got to get honest with ourselves, recognize those pieces which are part of our responsibility. You know, where do we tend to put ourselves aside, to put others first? What are the belief systems that we're still programmed and carrying around that are telling us that it's selfish to make sure that you're okay, that it's selfish to say no if that's something that's not okay for you? These are faulty programs that get installed in childhood. So we really need to upgrade all that. And then also what I call owning your reality. So, you know, the narcissists, these characters, they live in very distorted reality, and they will try to impose this on you through what we call gaslighting, where they distort your perception of reality and then call you crazy if you don't subscribe to their reality. And so it's so important, as you've gone through these relationships, you sort of develop this like deferring habit where you defer to the reality of someone else. Like, you know what happened, but someone else says it very convincingly just the opposite way. And so then you put aside your perception of reality and subscribe to theirs. So then we have to unsubscribe from all that stuff. And it could even be a lifetime of these things. We may not even have contact with these people anymore. They might even be dead, but we can still be in those reality paradigms. So we have to recognize, what are those beliefs? What is that reality? When are we still subscribed to the narcissist or the manipulator? And then rewriting that. And a big piece of that is learning to turn your approval inward. So codependents, people pleasers, we will look externally for validation, for approval. And part of the process is redirecting that inward so that we count on ourselves first, that we honor our feelings and our needs. Maybe that never happened in childhood. Maybe it never happened all of our life. So it's a very long and difficult process to rewire all these things, but it's worth it. And that's the most important thing I want people to know, is that it is hard work and it's very worth it.